So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our last talk of the Enviro-Art Gallery. We're so excited to have you here. And if you came to some other sessions, thank you so much for joining us. But today we have Caroline Reed. So Caroline Reed is a communications project manager at Climate Interactive and works with a climate analysis team to share the organization's latest simulation tools and experiences, like En-ROADS. She supports efforts across the organization to ensure everything is accessible and easy to use. Caroline has her master's in public health, focusing on environmental sciences, and studied at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Alongside this, Caroline has studied both studio art and graphic design and has employed these skills to further environmental communication work at nonprofits, universities, and governmental groups. Caroline currently considers herself a remote working nomad and is temporarily located in the Gulf Coast area. So Caroline, I will let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Emily. Okay, well, I'm going to start by sharing my screen and jump over to my PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully I can get like a thumbs up if you guys can see my slides. Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this Saturday. I'm really excited to be part of this event. As Emily said, I went to UNC Chapel Hill and I also worked at Duke for a little while. So I'm like really familiar with that area. I'm from North Carolina. I've lived in like Carrboro, Chapel Hill, Durham, and I'm actually going to be back in Durham in a few months. So it's a place close to my heart, and I'm really excited about this opportunity because I study both art and environmental sciences, and I'm always looking for opportunities to find those intersection points between those two really important passions. So to be around people who also are interested in the same thing is something that's pretty hard to turn down. So a little bit more about my organization. So I work with Climate Interactive, and we're a pretty small not-for-profit think tank. We're about 17 people. We grew out of partnership with the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. So a decent proportion of our team is actually people who are systems thinkers and system dynamics modelers. They're very mathy. They do a lot of equations and modeling and things that I can't quite touch on, but they work really hard to develop these scientifically grounded climate models, such like En-ROADS, which we're going to be talking about today. The other half of our team works to make these models accessible and build experiences around them, which people can use to learn about the insights that are still data-driven in the model. So one of the things that, oh, and here's, excuse me, our agenda. I forgot that I had this slide on there twice, but we're in the intro. So one of our partners, Professor John Sturman of MIT Sloan, is quoted to say, "Research shows that showing people research doesn't work." So whether you're in art or you're in science or whatever brings you here, you've probably done your fair share of research at some point or read research papers, graphs, articles, encountered just that indoctrination of data that can be a little bit overwhelming. And with climate, which is something that's so complicated, but also so abstract, we really feel like you need to learn for yourself and see for yourself what solutions and interventions can be most impactful. So a lot of this thinking is what has grounded, or excuse me, what has inspired us to create experiences, simulations, and tools that complement our data-driven climate simulators. So En-ROADS, which we'll be talking about and showing you later today, is a cutting-edge simulation model that we've built with MIT. It is grounded in the best available science. So for example, it pulls from data sources such as the IEA and the IPCC. All of the references, equations, and parameters can be found in our really long 400-page reference guide. You can go in there if that's your thing, but maybe not unless you're really into the equations there. But and we test it rigorously. It's been built over 15 years, and we actually update the model every month. So as data changes, as projections change, such as at the end of last year, we were seeing amazing new trends in the growth of renewable energy. We updated our model to reflect these changes because it's important to us to not make something once and then advocate it for 5 years in the future. We think it's really important to keep seeing what science is out there, keep seeing what data is coming in, and reflect the world's changes that are ongoing around us. So how do we use En-ROADS? So En-ROADS is used in events across the world. You guys are in one of them right now. So far, we've had over 47,000 participants in our En-ROADS events from 69 different countries, led by almost 700 facilitators. So our facilitators can be anyone. They can be someone like me who works for a team, but more often it's volunteers or people who are just excited about climate. We have facilitators who are professors, teachers, students, business leaders, people who speak to their government, people who are just citizen activists, artists, lawyers, like you could name it, and we've probably had someone lead an En-ROADS event like that. And the entire network and all of the tools that we use are free. We offer free trainings. I'll talk about that at the end. But we really just, our mission is to use the events as a method to help people derive insights on climate action, and climate solutions in a way that's both interactive and engaging. So a couple more notes about our events. They've been run with some pretty high caliber people. So John Kerry is the US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate for the new administration. And as you can see here, he quotes, En-ROADS is quite simply a climate crisis game changer for policymakers and people across the country. So we're trying really hard to get this model in front of key decision makers in governmental spheres. We've got public figures such as Bill Nye who have seen the model and who have loved the model. And then in general, we have just been trying to show it to anyone who is, willing to learn from it. We have one of our business partnerships consultant, Chris Page, she works with us. She does a lot in sustainability and corporate spaces, and is bringing it to all of these amazingly large companies, trying to integrate learning into those spaces. NGO leaders, universities, schools across the countries. We've actually shown it to a lot of members of Congress and the Senate and in the United States. And so we're really trying to diffuse this as widely as we can. And the thing that's great about the simulator is it explores so many different types of climate solutions that it fits into a lot of different spaces and can cultivate some really diverse conversations. So now that you guys know a little more about who we are and what we do, I want to just give a brief background on climate. I mean, you guys are all here because you're obvious, or I would assume you might be environmentalists or environmentally minded, but there are just a few principles I want to make sure we walk through if you're not familiar. So we're going to just review a little bit what's at stake. So over the past several thousands of years, we had a constant, although there's obviously slight fluctuations, but a relatively constant pattern of CO2 in our atmosphere. Since the Industrial Revolution, you can see around this time period, we see these levels spike. So this is completely unprecedented, but it also aligns pretty obviously with some of these benchmarks of when we started to industrialize the world and emit CO2. Beyond just CO2, we are seeing just a total increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So greenhouse gases being any type of compound that can be in the atmosphere that's good at holding heat. So these things, trap the heat from the sun that's radiated off the earth. And this is not just our CO2 from fossil fuels. We're also talking about that from land use and forestry. And then we're looking at methane, the CH4 right here, which comes most often from agricultural emissions and waste emissions. So actual, cow burps. And then also we're thinking about organic matter in landfills and the the emissions that come from that. Nitrous oxide here, and F gases, which is often associated with like fertilizers, industrial agriculture, and refrigerants for F gases, things like industrial coolants. And all of these things come together to kind of showcase our greenhouse gas emissions profile. And you can see that in the last 150 or now 170 years that these have been steadily on the increase. So what does that mean for temperature? Obviously, we all know this. We're in the middle of the climate crisis, and we've already seen over 1 degree Celsius of temperature rising. I want to orient you now to, this is a graph from En-ROADS. We're going to pull up the actual simulator in just a minute, but this is our baseline scenario. So when we're in the simulator, we'll be able to create our current scenario, and we'll watch these lines bend away from the path that we're on. Just gonna check the chat. Oh, in the middle. Okay, that's just a comment. Anyway, so as we continue on, we are looking to see 3.6 degrees of climate, or excuse me, of 3.6 degrees Celsius of temperature rise through the end of 2100. So what this means for us is, well, we'll get into the impacts in just a second, but we're striving to limit warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's these two lines right here. And the impacts of this are pretty significant. Here's a few examples of what 3 degrees Celsius of temperature rise would mean. So this would mean Arctic sea ice disappearing in the summer, 50% of insect species lost, extensive drought, forest fires. I mean, we're seeing at a little over 1 degree Celsius some pretty significant impacts of climate change worldwide. And you can even look at the fiscal evidence of this as well. So between 2016 and 2018, there was $650 billion of damage due to climate-related disasters. And that was 5 years ago. So when they look forward, they can predict that it's going to be massive amounts of damage associated with climate-related disasters. And we'll talk much more later about all of the actual concerns for humanity and people and health and ecosystems. But these numbers don't lie. But we're not here to talk about the impacts and the scary aspects of climate change. What we want to focus on are those goals. So the 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees C. In 2015, government bodies from across the world met at the Paris Agreement and decided that these were our climate goals. 2 degrees Celsius is the kind of the bare minimum of what we want to limit warming to, and 1.5 degrees Celsius is really what we want to strive to. Even at 1.5, we're still going to be seeing many places impacted by climate change. So we're really hoping to just be as aggressive as possible. And what we're going to do today is build a scenario of climate success. It is still very, very possible that we can meet these climate goals. Even with deviations from the plan in the past few years in the United States, we can be back on track. We can, this is a global effort regardless, but it is still economically, politically, socially, environmentally feasible that we can meet these goals. So what we're going to do today is simulate what that could potentially look like. In order to do that, I actually am going to probably just use the chat so we don't have to go into poll everywhere. But I would like to first ask, what are some, well, actually, I'll flip over to the simulator real quick, orient everyone, and then we'll back up and ask that question. So En-ROADS, which I've been talking a little bit about now for a few minutes, and I can shrink this, maybe. Okay, so this is the En-ROADS simulator. So it's freely available online. You could go right now if you want to, but I'll drop the link in so you guys can check it out for yourselves. Open source, it runs in real time. So what you'll see that in just a moment. And I just want to orient you to the interface. So on the left here, we have our global sources of primary energy. So these graphs run from about 21 years ago, 2000, up through 2100. And on the left, we're looking at where are we getting our energy from globally. So the whole model is a globally integrated model. So coal here in brown, oil in red, gas in blue, renewables in green, bioenergy in pink, nuclear, this tiny sliver of like a cyan, if that's how you pronounce it. And then new zero carbon is going to be how we simulate a new type of energy source. So this could be like thorium fusion, thorium fission, new innovations in nuclear, new innovations in any type of zero carbon energy source that does not yet exist or is not yet implemented worldwide. And this whole group of wedges kind of shows us what our energy profile looks like currently. So as you can see, a generous proportion of it is currently dominated by coal, oil, and gas, or fossil fuels. We do see this exciting growth of renewables throughout the rest of the century. Bioenergy is relatively the same, and it will change and react. This graph over here will change and react based on the policies or the solutions that we decide to implement. So for example, if we decide to tax coal, which you can see here in the brown, you'll watch the graph on the left respond accordingly. Then let's orient you to this next graph. So this is just a greenhouse gas net emissions. So this is just going to show in total of all those greenhouse gases we talked about previously, both carbon, methane, nitrous oxide, F gases, the whole bundle. What are we emitting, and how does our baseline, which is what we're on track for, compare to a current scenario if we implement solutions in the simulator? Last, on the right, we have that temperature output, so 3.6 degrees Celsius, or if you prefer Fahrenheit, 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is the temperature that we can expect to be reaching at 2100 if we take no further action from today forward. So just to give you guys kind of a little demo of what it looks like before we jump in together and build this scenario, I'd like to just, let's hypothesize. Let's say we're thinking about implementing a solution, and you can see we have solutions in the energy supply, which are often either represented by taxes or subsidies. We have transportation, so buildings and industry. These are all just encouraging growth or discouraging growth. Here we have population growth rate, economic growth rate. We also have land and industry emissions. So this is like things like deforestation, but also looking at some of the methane and other gases from agricultural and industrial emissions. And then last, we have carbon removal, and this is natural sources like afforestation, and then also technological sources, which is new innovations in ways to physically withdraw carbon from the atmosphere. And we'll get into some of these details later, play around together, but let's pretend we want to simulate the impact of increasing the energy efficiency of our buildings and industries worldwide. So what this means, you can click these three dots. So this is just, it could be a lot of different solutions, but it basically means that we're trying to make all of our buildings that we both want to retrofit, so work on in the past, and then also build going forward, more energy efficient. We just want them to use less energy. So this can be very simple things like building a house with windows facing the right side of, there's like certain angles to the sun where you can save heat and use less heat in the winter. It could also be proper insulation. It can be energy efficient lighting, energy efficient like heating sources, air conditioners. There's so many solutions. And if we were to say that this is going to be a place we focus on globally and we really increase the energy efficiency, I'm going to replay this last change. And I want you to watch what happens with both our global sources of energy and also our greenhouse gas net emissions. So we're going to see that with that change, we're seeing some significant payoff in 0.3 degrees Celsius of temperature falling. We're seeing our greenhouse gas emissions falling. And even more interestingly, we're seeing that not just our energy sources are changing in their nature, but that we're just using less energy in this sense, because all of these wedges add up to the total amount of energy we're using. So that's just like one little demo. What I'd like to do now is reset the simulator, go back to our baseline. I'm going to jump back into Zoom and ask you guys a question. Well, actually, I will be still sharing my screen. Okay, so what I'd like to hear from you guys is, what are some climate actions you have heard about recently? So this could be in the media, social media, or on the news. It could be in your community. It could be at your school, at your work, in government, anywhere that's, it could be on a documentary. It could be anything that's pressing you, maybe, and you've heard about in the last 6 months to a year. And I'd love to hear what's on your minds. I can give you guys a second. And I'm just going to open up the chat. Don't know if I can share my slides at the same time as having the chat up. Okay, so I'm seeing solar energy subsidies in Florida, more renewable energies, algal energy. More from solar. Oh, New Mexico. That's awesome. Electric car infrastructure. Yeah, so there's been a lot of excitement in electric cars, and that, especially in the United States recently, and then in renewables, there's a lot going on there. Oh, a circular economy is great. Okay, so I'm just going to start testing a few of these in En-ROADS, and we're going to work together to build a scenario. So I can go full screen. It does kind of block my Zoom control, so maybe not. Okay, so let's think about renewable energy. So what would it look like if we were to subsidize renewable energy sources worldwide? So this is everything from wind and solar, which are the two main sources, to hydropower. And there are some smaller sources of renewable energy, but mainly wind, solar, and hydro are what are captured in the model here. So renewables are sliders here, and I'd like you to pay attention to this graph here on the left. So we have renewable energy in green, and we have several of our fossil fuel sources here at the bottom. What do we think is going to happen to both the renewables wedge and then also the coal, oil, and gas wedges after we move the renewables subsidy onto the simulator? I'd like you to think about that and think about temperature. Like, what impact do you think that this solution could have? So we will increase and highly subsidize our renewable energy, and we'll replay that change. So we see this green wedge of renewables growing significantly. It was already growing throughout the end of the century because of just market demand and how it's getting so much cheaper. But now we're really subsidizing it, and we're seeing this payoff in emissions reduction and also in temperature. Some people, when they see this dynamic on the simulator, can be a little surprised that there's not a much larger fall in temperature. And what I'd like to say to that is that you still have to think about where we're pulling our energy from and how much energy we're using. By making one source of energy cheaper, it can actually lead to it outcompeting other cheap sources. But renewables are a new type of energy infrastructure that still needs to be researched and built out worldwide. And right when it is being developed in the first half of the century, or where we are maybe until about 2060, where it looks like it really widens that wedge, it's still a bit expensive and it's still a bit hard to deploy. Coal, for instance, is still relatively cheap and accessible, and the infrastructure already exists in many parts of the world. So while people are still burning coal and burning natural gas, which are what is kind of the equivalent energy source type to renewables, we're going to see that there are still significant emissions happening throughout the latter half of the century. Once we look towards other solutions which better suppress those fossil fuel sources, that's where our renewable energy sources can really, really thrive. And even with this, they're still thriving, and there's so many co-benefits to using renewable energy sources. The main one is cleaner air. I mean, the amount of people that die worldwide from air pollution is devastating already. It's millions of people, premature deaths every year. And renewables are much, much cleaner. There are obviously considerations on how to justly transition our workforces and how to justly manage the excavation of resources for renewable energy. So there's a lot of components, but overall, renewables do offer many, many co-benefits for health. They could offer opportunities for new jobs, and they also can reduce toxic wastes, which are typically located, at least in the United States. Toxic waste from coal plants and from natural gas mining can often be near marginalized communities. So it gives us an opportunity to reorient the way we want to think about our energy grid, protect communities that have been damaged by fossil fuels in the past, and also just lead to a cleaner energy source in general, which is much less carbon intensive and cleaner for the air. So an amazing solution. We like to say it takes a lot of seeds to grow the garden. So this is just one to get us started. Let's also look at our transportation sector. So here we have energy efficiency and electrification. So first we'll start with electrification. This means just this means introducing less of our traditional combustion engine vehicles, so things that burn petroleum oil, and using cars that are just powered by electricity instead. So if we were to massively encourage this worldwide, and then look at the impact that that has on temperature, I'd like you to pay attention to the dynamic here as it replays. I'll replay it one more time after that on our energy grid. So once again, we're seeing renewables gain some traction in that wedge that they have. The reason we're not seeing massive gains on temperature quite yet is because we're still being powered by many of these fossil fuel sources in this scenario. So it's important to recognize that while renewables are now occupying almost half of the market share of energy, we're still using this much, we're still using this much of our fossil fuels, which doesn't quite derail the emissions profile going forward. So we have to start to think about how can we change the amount of these fuels that are the heavy emitters, and then also we'll think about other other greenhouse gases too. So while we're in the transportation sector, I think it would be cool to explore energy efficiency as well. And also, I saw a few comments, but I haven't been able to read them yet. If you have a solution you'd like to test, just go ahead and write it in and we'll work through them together. And I'll check back in the chat after this one. So here we're thinking about how can we just use less energy while fueling our world's transportation system. So this is things like actually engineering vehicles to be more energy efficient. So think about new types of cars that use less gas, or new types of buses that use less gas. Also carpooling or walking or biking, or any type of solution that just means we are using less transportation energy. And so if we were to increase this, I want you to think about what's going to happen to this total amount of energy we're actually pulling from our world, total amount of energy that we are using when we look at these sources. So if we increase, and say we highly increase our transportation system's energy, we're starting to see some really cool effects, and you can watch the actual total amount of exajoules per year fall, which is really exciting. And when used in combination with our electrification of transport, you then are seeing that, okay, a lot of the vehicles on the road are eventually going to be powered by renewable energy. But still in this scenario, until we have managed to, in some way, de-incentivize coal and these other cheap sources, electric vehicles can still be powered by fossil fuels. And that's the tricky dynamic there, is just both electrifying our transportation fleet and also making our grid more green in general, so that when we power our cars, they're not being powered by natural gas and coal. So I'm gonna flip back onto the chat. Okay, afforestation, reduction in coal-fired electricity production, and bamboo hemp grass instead of trees for paper products. Cool, so these are some really exciting things. I see first the coal-fired electricity production, and we were just talking about coal, so I might go there first, and then we can talk about some natural-based land solutions. So coal here on the left, we have these 3 dots. You can explore a lot of advanced settings and inroads. If you guys want to look at it during this session or after the session, I advise you to. I'll definitely drop the link in. But you can see here, you can affect coal with taxes and subsidies, or you can directly reduce the utilization of coal. So this simulates just % reduction in how much it's being used. We use 50% less coal, for example. You can also stop building new coal infrastructure. So this is a really important part of this. Coal infrastructure typically lasts about 30 years. So a plant being built today isn't going to necessarily be gone, and probably will still be being used in 2050. So a pretty important intervention is to actually stop the construction of these factories, because if they build them, they're probably going to use them. So let's both look at reducing coal utilization in general. So let's say we go to about a 40% drop, and you can see when we replay this, the wedge shrinking. And then we really are just over coal. We want to stop building new coal infrastructure. We're going to really subsidize renewables in this scenario, and we're going to help people transition from coal jobs to renewable jobs. So we stop building coal infrastructure. And that's currently going to show you that this wedge dies out, and that's about the lifespan of some of these coal plants that will be going throughout the end of that time period, dropping off around like 2065, it looks like. And you can see the profile change a lot. With coal not on the market, renewables takes up an even larger proportion. So you can actually watch the bottom of this wedge take on some of that market space that coal was previously occupying. And you also see huge payoffs in our temperature from these two things. So I know that sometimes with these numbers, it can feel odd when it's like 0.3 degrees Celsius, but these are massive accomplishments and massive marks. A few a few decimal points of a degree Celsius can be the difference between lots of consequences and climate impacts. So we're already 0.7 lower than where we started. We're below 3 degrees, avoiding some of the worst possible climate impacts. And all we've really looked at is our coal, renewables, and our transportation sector. There are still so many solutions that we can explore. So let's keep doing that. And in this process, by reducing the amount of coal we used, increasing renewables, and cleaning up our transportation sector, we've also had huge payoffs for air pollution. So I'd like to actually show you guys that as well. You can look at air pollution from energy source by area. So I'm gonna just pull up another scenario and show you what it looks like before we made all of these changes. So this is what it looks like before we've implemented all of our solutions. This is PM 2.5, which is a specific, very dangerous type of air pollution. It comes mainly from coal. They're very tiny particles that can get lodged into people's lungs and cause lung disease, heart disease, many other morbidities worldwide, and lead to millions of premature deaths worldwide currently. So looking at the pollution through the end of the 21st century and this previous baseline scenario is upsetting. And you can see this massive brown stain that is air pollution from coal. Look at the scenario we've just created. By just shutting down new coal infrastructure and reducing coal use and switching to these renewable sources, we have really bottomed out this scary thing. And the great thing about air pollution is, unlike other environmental impacts, which take more time to reach homeostasis and like recuperate, they're more difficult to tackle. Air pollution, the second we stop burning a lot of these fossil fuels, we're going to see pretty quick returns and payoffs and improved air pollution. And as a result, we're going to see many people worldwide getting to live healthier lives, getting to live better lives. So it's really encouraging to see that, you know, whenever we can manage to switch our energy grid, we're going to see these huge payoffs for people across the world. So now we can move back and look at afforestation. So afforestation is a really exciting climate solution. It got a lot of traction in the last few years with the 1 trillion trees initiative. But nonetheless, it's exciting because it's using natural resources and natural systems to help remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the whole philosophy is basically by planting a lot of trees that we will be able to use their natural cycles to withdraw CO2, and they'll store it rather than us having it in our atmosphere. So how we like to think about this is the percent of land available for afforestation, because that's a pretty important consideration. You can say we want to plant 1 trillion trees, but where are you going to plant them? Because you can't plant them everywhere, and certain types of trees thrive in different climates. Is it public land, private land? Is it farming? Is it not? These are just really important questions. So we are going to just really incentivize afforestation. And what you'll see here is there is a payoff of 0.1 degree Celsius here. But what you'll want to, we're actually going to look at, let's see. Okay. So this graph down here, these are like recommended graphs you can explore, contrasts how we're looking at the amount of land used for afforestation. So that's just in this green right now, versus the amount of land it takes to cover the area of India. So that's this gray line. This is a really cool figure. I think it shows you how much land it takes to significantly afforest our world. And India is massive, and finding the amount of land to cover India with trees would be, you know, quite an undertaking. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it is an important consideration. And The reason we're not seeing the massive payoffs in temperature by 2100 is because many of these trees take decades to get to their full fruition point. So if we start planting trees now, we have to think about the fact that they may not be mature for 20, 30, 80, 100 years, depending on the species of the tree. However, afforesting land as a climate solution offers so many co-benefits. It is natural. It isn't risky in the sense that like technological carbon removal potential solution could be, because we know how trees work and we know that they will remove carbon, versus investing in technologies that doesn't invent or does not yet exist might be more uncertain. So they also offer benefits to people in the sense that green spaces and trees are good for people. They also clean the air in the sense of air quality. They also offer potential opportunities for agroforestry and other natural solutions. Speaking of natural solutions, I saw a couple of comments about wanting to explore those more specifically. And although today I cannot go into that in more depth, we are actually working to build out this section of our model more. We have a team that's dedicated to working on land, agriculture, and forestry, and we're looking at natural solutions and how to better build out that section of the simulator. So I can't quite show that to you guys yet. We're always trying to add things on. There's so many amazing new climate solutions surfacing. So I'm sorry I can't go into that a little further. I'm going to check back in the chat here. Let's keep going, and we can get to some questions at the end. But I'm just going to work through, because I can see we're already getting pretty close to the end of the hour. So I'm just going to work through a few more climate solutions. One place we haven't yet looked, excuse me. So if we go to our greenhouse gas emissions by gas, so this is different than over here where we're looking at energy sources. This is just our greenhouse gas emissions profile. So think back to that graph we looked at in the presentation at the beginning. And where are we still seeing large wedges of greenhouse gas emissions throughout the end of the century? We still have a generous proportion of energy CO2, which is coming most likely from, excuse me, our coal, or not our coal, our oil and our gas. We also have this blue wedge right here, which is our CH4 or our methane emissions. And while there is less actual, well, this is a CO2 equivalent, but methane is still an extremely potent greenhouse gas. And so although it is less equivalent to the total CO2, it is still a really key component of addressing this. So I'd like to look a little further at how we can alter our methane and other greenhouse gas emissions. So using the advanced settings here in the simulator, you can break it out by agricultural and waste emissions. So this is what we were talking about earlier with like actual livestock emissions, and also waste from both food and like household waste. So like agricultural, industry-wide waste, and the waste we create, our body waste and our food waste. And we're also looking at N2O, which is our nitrous oxide, which is often associated with fertilizers. And we can really reduce this. Let's say there's a massive push. And then we're incentivized to reduce our energy and industrial emissions of these gases, also including F gases, the things from like coolants, refrigerators, air conditioners. And these are industrial, also often emitted in industrial processes. And we really induce that to 70% too. And we're going to go back right before, and we're going from 2.8 to 2.5. That's a significant wedge. And I know that we're all probably pretty well versed in many of the dialogues surrounding agriculture, food waste, and why it's so important to look to this component of climate solutions. But switching to a more vegetarian or a more vegan diet offers health benefits for a lot of people. It's been argued to really be a holistic solution. And we also can think about how reducing food waste, or maybe better allocating food waste to not just the landfill, but to people, could be a really critical component of not just addressing climate change, but addressing equity and addressing people's right to have access to food. So all of these things are interconnected with larger issues and sustainable development goals. And So it's really cool to think about what other things are happening when we actually are seeing the payoff just in the physical climate profile. I'll check back in the chat in case anyone's written in. Let's see, with another solution. Meat consumption, so we were just talking on that. Okay, then we'll just keep working through. So we still have this large wedge of energy from CO2. I'd like to implement a carbon price, for example. So let's say this is a pretty effective way to address this remaining daunting wedge. So a carbon price is a blanket tax that basically taxes any energy source that is carbon intensive. So we're thinking here coal, although we've already managed to pretty much shut down coal, oil, natural gas, and certain types of bioenergy are actually carbon intensive, although they are renewable in the sense that you can get the fuel from places like trees and other natural sources. Some of these sources, not all of them, do burn dirty, and that's pretty important to know. They burn as much or even more carbon intensive than coal can burn. So if you look at our profiles over here on the left and you think about oil and natural gas remaining, and we implement a carbon price of, let's see what that equates to. So let's just make it $100 a ton CO2. We see these 0.3 falling off of our temperature profile. So we're watching these energy sources shrink. Renewables, a clean or a low carbon energy source, is allowed to thrive. And we're seeing the payoffs over here with that wedge shrinking and our temperature getting really close to our climate goals. Maybe we also want to invest in new technologies and we say, you know what, it's time for a new era. We want to make sure that we can remove as much carbon as possible and really create the best climate scenario for our future. We would maybe assume there's medium growth in types of carbon removal technologies. So this is there's actually encapsulates 5 different types. You can see afforestation is natural, but the rest of these are innovations. So we have bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. We have direct air capture. Just imagine a giant, almost like a vortex machine that pulls carbon from the atmosphere. Enhanced mineralization. This is certain types of rocks can be ground up and spread across large surfaces of land, and they are better absorbing carbon. Agricultural soil carbon sequestration and biochar are some more. And with these things, we've reached 2 degrees, and maybe we want to push it a little further. We want to reduce deforestation because we want to save our rainforests. We want to save our forests worldwide as much as we possibly can to protect the species and the communities that benefit from them. We also potentially want to increase the energy efficiency of our buildings, increase the electrification of our buildings. And we're suddenly looking at a climate future that is so much better than the one we've begun with. We can flip back over here to see this 3.6, 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit of temperature increase by 2100, and our emissions profile and our air quality as a result. And then contrast that to this new scenario, which is just one of millions that can be built. That's what's so fun about these workshops, is that every single time we do it, it looks different. You can literally create an unending amount of scenarios, and you can go into advanced settings and really explore how you would want to create your climate future. And with this one scenario, we're seeing massive growth of our renewables energy, our renewable energy sources. We're seeing fossil fuels pewter and die throughout the end of the century. And we're seeing our emissions not only tucker out, but we're also seeing our removal. So below this 0 line, both in land use, so that's our afforestation, and our carbon dioxide removal through technological sources, this gray, actually pull some of that CO2 out for us, in addition to just stopping the emissions themselves. And we're now looking at a much better climate future than we were on track for. 1.7 degrees of Celsius warming compared to 3.6 has astronomical different implications for the world around us. And what we like to do now, I can see we're getting close to the top of the hour, is we like to reflect on how this makes us feel. So I want you to all take 1 minute and look at this scenario, and I'll actually time us, and think about what would you love about being part of this future beyond just the climate dynamics, beyond just that the temperature is lower. What are the co-benefits, the payoffs, the rewards for humanity, for nature, for society that you're seeing and that you're feeling grateful for, and that you would want to see in the world? So I'm going to give us 1 minute of silence to look at this scenario and reflect, starting now. Okay, so that puts us at 1 minute. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and jump back into the space with everyone. Okay, here we go. I would love for people to keep writing in, or we can actually unmute. We have enough time to do that. If anyone would want to unmute, that would be the best. But I also can just read these if people are feeling a little microphone shy. I'm seeing not having to face despair and climate grief and extinction grief every day. Absolutely. Huge reduction in anxiety surrounding the future planet. Great to stop worrying about my kids' future as it relates to deterring environmental issues and what may all be ahead for us, or what may be ahead for us all. And more equity, hopefully. Yes, absolutely. Healthier people and planet. These are all wonderful. And one thing another part of our work, this has been a lot about the model, but we have another section of our work called multi-solving. Dr. Beth Salwin, she's one of our co-directors and co-founders, kind of coined this principle. And it's how can we address more than one issue at a time with one solution? So thinking a lot about the intersections of not just climate change, but also with environmental justice, with equity, with public health. Where are we seeing all of these deficits and systemic injustices that can be corrected when we implement the right solutions in the right way? Deteriorating and not deterring. Oh, gotcha. Deteriorating environmental issues. So I want to jump back in and just talk a little bit more about what we can see in this scenario, or another scenario where we've managed to limit warming, and also just think about what actions are being taken around us and what can we all do. So just thinking about one component, this is a global perspective. The benefits of the benefits of climate action from a health perspective. So by limiting warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, hopefully striving for 1.5, we're preventing 153 million premature deaths from air pollution by 2100. Unreal. That is a massive, unfathomable number of people. And most often, the people that are suffering from premature deaths from air pollution are not, if not ever, the people who are benefiting from emitting those fossil fuel sources to begin with. So these people are people who deserve a fair chance to just breathe clean air. I mean, I think everyone does. And you can see just huge reductions of morbidities and mortalities. Saving also, you could look at it from a financial perspective. So $1.2 trillion per year in health costs by switching to clean, or I guess this is just clean transportation, but we're also seeing, if we look at the United States, for example, preventing almost 300,000 premature deaths from air pollution by 2030. This is not just a non-United States or other parts of the world problem. This is happening right here. The amount of people suffering from air pollution in the United States is not small, and this number just further reiterates that. And you can also expect that, again, it's going to be communities who are traditionally marginalized by the United States government, by the capitalist economy that we live in. And so we can think about whose lives are these saving. Preventing emergency room visits from childhood asthma, preventing, I guess, adult work hours. So that could be equated to like well-being, how people are able to support themselves. And going on around us. So a quick pivot, I guess, from this is these are some pretty important payoffs, but what's actually starting to happen? Like, where are these numbers? Where are all of the energy that's starting to finally gain traction within the climate movement? What's happening around us? And we're seeing that in September of 2019, over 7 million people from 185 countries showed up for our global climate strikes. A lot of this is led by grassroots organizations. People have been more vocal in the past few years and more willing to not only talk about the fact that climate change is real, but actually try to have meaningful conversations on climate. We're also seeing that companies are starting to take action. So just a few examples. We see H&M, for example, has promised to double its energy efficiency. We have Microsoft making pledges. GM recently decided to promise us a fully electric fleet. Just lots of large corporations are finally buying in and trying to find ways to help. It's still important to look closely at these promises. Some are more impactful than others, but it does show a positive tide that's turning in this space. Also, around the world, we're starting to see that carbon prices and emission trading systems are being implemented or are proposed to be implemented. So this map is, you don't have to look too closely, but it does light up some of the places that are actually scheduling these emissions trading systems. So basically, companies that pollute too much will have to pay for that, or they can buy other companies' kind of pollution quotas. So if this company is deciding not to pollute very much anymore, they can sell their emissions rights to larger polluter companies, and overall it brings down the level because there's a finite amount of emissions allowed. Carbon prices, like we explored earlier, just apply taxes to carbon intense energy sources. And we're hoping that, you know, some of these things are trickling into the United States, but other parts of the world are making great headway. You can see China is already either implementing or has scheduled to implement an ETS, emissions trading standard. Parts of Europe, looking at South America, like there's some really cool work being done there. And these things are really exciting. These are really groundbreaking policies that are starting to diffuse worldwide. So lastly, I'd like to think about, you know, what can you do? So I realize this is all, you know, it can be a bit abstract in the sense of it's a global problem. It is, and it's also something that's not here yet, or in the sense of the 2100 landmark is not here yet. It is actually going on around us, but we like to think about it in which circles can you intervene? And maybe it's just one, maybe it's all of them, but we like to think of it as like this circles of intervention. So first you have your personal level. So what can you do today or at any point? You can decide to learn, which is what you're doing here today. You could donate money, you could donate time. You could decide to just walk instead of driving. You could reduce the amount of plastic you use. You could reduce the amount of waste you use. You can reuse things. You can really do things in your personal circle to improve the world we're living in, make it more sustainable, and you know, have that aspect. And your social network, this could be sharing goods with people. So that's kind of like a reduce and a reuse. Teaching people, talk to them about what you might have learned today. You can try to persuade others to learn more about this or to take action, support others, be a leader at an organizational level. So this could be at your school, this could be at your work. share ideas, try to change processes and procedures, maybe question, why is this being done this way for so long? Why haven't we looked back at this thing that's not working for us anymore? It's not serving us. And try to reimagine a better system. We can create durable products, so things that are more like the actual building or the materials people are working with. Publicly, you can vote, protest, organize, run for office. Culturally, we're talking about just the conversation. So how normalized is something? What are the conversations that we hear frequently? Is it in the news? Is it in the public eye? And how can we affect those norms so that it precipitates into all of these other layers of intervention? And one of the things, this is just talking a little bit more about our programs. If any of you are interested, we run a training program, and we're actually currently rebooting it. We ran it last year. We have almost, this is actually just now 299 ambassadors in just 1 year who have gone through the trainings and who have learned to run En-ROADS events just like this. But we are making the training even more fun and using like an online learning software. It's entirely free. We're working really hard on it. And basically, as an ambassador, you just want to learn about En-ROADS, you want to learn about climate, and you take the simulator and these types of workshops. We also have games and student assignments. We have all these different ways to engage with the model. And you take it to your space. It could be just your family. It could be your friends. It could be your classroom. It could be your workplace. And you talk to them about some of the lessons we learned today and help inspire people to take effective action on climate. So if you're interested, I'll drop that link in the chat in just a minute. And I want to thank you all for coming. I can tell we're right at 1 o'clock, so we have a little bit of time left, but I'd love to answer any questions. And yeah, I'll come back into the space. And I'm gonna really quickly drop the sign up page for that training plan if anyone is actually interested in joining us. And yeah, if anyone wants to unmute and ask questions, I'll preface with saying that I am on our communications and program building team. So I know I know a decent amount of technical aspects to the model, but if for some reason I cannot answer your question fully, then I would like you to also visit this page. This is our support page. We have a team of people who are constantly working to just respond to people's questions. We bring in our modelers when it's a more technical or advanced question, and we typically can get back to you within a few days. So that's a backup plan as well, or if we just don't have time or you have to run or something like that. But yeah, that's all from my end. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I do have one question if
yeah, of course.
People are okay with me starting off. You briefly mentioned that you were starting to, or the program was going in one direction, starting to build in some even more simulations, even more considerations. And I was just wondering, like, what are the main directions that the new additions are going in? For example, I know that I take a class on on managing the oceans, and there's a lot of like mangrove, like sea marshes, a lot of ocean and marine solutions. And I was wondering, like, is that one of the things that the En-ROADS is thinking of including, or just what directions like is it going in right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's kind of a funny question because or a funny answer I have, because it's basically the model is going to become as much as our really, really hardworking team of modelers can make it. So this model has been grown or built over 15 years, and it didn't look anything like this up until December of 2019. Like, it was just this like much more dated skeleton. And then a few years before that, it was like completely not user friendly. Like, it was just for people who know systems dynamics softwares and they could go in the back end. So as we've built it out, we've also built out not just the usability, but the solutions we are exploring. So that's one of the things we are actually trying to always increase, is that as new solutions arise, we want to learn more about what impacts we think they'll have on our climate system. And if we can get access to enough data that is peer reviewed, is accepted, then we can hopefully work to work that into our model. I don't know all of the exact details, but we are building out the land, agriculture, and forestry portion of the model, and a lot of those sections will hopefully include advanced settings with specific types of natural solutions. So like mangroves, I can't speak to the technical details of whether those would be included in the afforestation slider currently, or if that would be a different type of modeling, because it's like that's in water and there's like, you know, different exchanges going on there with gases and things like that. But we have releases almost every month, and we like cover them in notes and webinars. And I can say that that is one of the sections that's being built out. We're also working really hard to build out our impacts. So I didn't focus too much on climate impacts besides air pollution in this presentation, but we're hoping to have things like jobs, things like other indicators of like environmental health, things like, I'm trying to remember the total that they're working on. But you can also explore, I'll share screen really quickly. In the model over here, if you go to graphs, impacts, you can see things like ocean acidification, sea level rise. Like we do have some of those things in here now. They just aren't relevant in every workshop, because it, you know, if we were presenting to an ocean group, then we would probably dive super deep on that. But yeah, we're constantly working to try to build it out. So I hope that roughly answers your question.
I had a question about what kind of work, if any, that you guys do for like policy or enacting these changes. So, you know, modeling this has been really helpful in seeing like how much each change would actually, you know, decrease our potential temperature rise. But you know, it's only going to be as helpful as if we actually implement these changes. So is Climate Interactive doing anything in that space, or are you kind of hoping that by getting this out to more people and showing people, you know, that it is actually possible to decrease our emissions, and especially showing policymakers and people that could, you know, lobby their policymakers, that change will enact that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is definitely one of our goals. Luckily, through MIT, the partners who work for MIT, they have kind of an access to a network that, that our team does not fully have access to, in the sense of they know John Kerry, like they know people who are, at least in the United States, climate policy. And what we're just trying to do is to get the model in front of people and let them see for themselves and kind of play with it, experience it. And we hope that it will be like the main lesson we like to tell people from the model is that there's not one climate solution. We don't want the United States government to just say, if we electrify all of our cars, we're good, we did our part. Like, we want people to realize it takes a lot of different efforts, and that there's a lot of incentives to do all of these different efforts. So getting them in front of the simulator, we've even gotten like a Republican senator from Utah to engage with the simulator, and he liked it, which was like awesome for us. So like we've had you know, it's bipartisan, so we are just trying to show it to as many people as we can, get them to engage with it. That's definitely one of our biggest efforts. It just takes time and development. And we also have a lot of our ambassadors and facilitators who do show their local representatives and who show their congressperson, or who show their, you know, more local jurisdiction representatives, the model. And we also, not as much recently, but kind of to flip your question around, sometimes analyze policies. So it's both showing these models to policymakers, but for instance, after the Paris agreements, our team we kind of gained a little bit of media notoriety, because at the time, our modelers actually modeled what each country's post-Paris agreement pledges amounted to. And although people were talking about 2 degrees Celsius, you can look and see that the pledges were not on track for that. And so we were able to quantify what all of these really exciting policies meant, beyond just, oh, we're gonna plant these trees and we're gonna, you know, increase renewables. And it's like, okay, but we have to actually see what this means, because these numbers do matter. And hopefully that answered. I do see a comment right here. I'm so glad you could join, Elaine. And if anyone else has any questions, or if you have any things you want to connect on in the future, feel free to reach out. I'll also drop my email back in the chat one more time. So there's my email just in case. But yeah, I'm so glad you were all able to join, and I hope that it was a useful session. And if anyone has any questions, you could either reach me there, or our support team can get back to you at this address as well. I don't know if anyone else has any final statements or questions, or Isabel and Emily, if you guys had anything you wanted to conclude with. But
yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us today, and thank you everyone for coming. We thank you for coming to this whole week of speakers and ending with us this afternoon. It's been great to see some familiar names at each one and familiar faces. And we encourage you to check out the sites. The site will continue to be live way after this week. And if you missed any of the speaker sessions, they're all recorded on there, or most of them are recorded on there, so you can look at those. So thank you so much for coming, and have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
thank you guys so much.